Welcome to the OC24 podcast, where we've taken some of the best talks and discussions from this year's 24-hour conference on global organised crime, which showcases some of the most interesting research into organised crime around the world. This episode is called Criminal Gangs.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, I want to thank all the panelists. We have a very exciting session ahead of us. We're going to be focused on criminal gangs, organized crime, social behavior. So we really have the best speakers here in our panel, and feel free, who's ever joined afterwards, to ask questions. We're going to do live presentations, live chats. So we have 75 minutes for this exciting panel, and hopefully everyone will enjoy. I would like to give a short introduction of the panelists today, and also about myself. My name is Paul Friedberg. I'm actually working today in Celebrite, which is a company dealing with digital forensics and digital intelligence. I retired a year ago from the Israeli Ministry of Defense after 27 years in operational and management positions. So my background is defense and international defense cooperation. With us today, we have Mr. Andrew Miller. Andrew is an expert on relations among criminal groups, police, and communities with a focus on the United States and Nigeria. Mr. Miller's research explores issues surrounding organized crime, policing, and conflict. Prior to that, he was in the Naval Academy. I'd like to emphasize that Mr. Andrew Miller holds a PhD in political science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he was a member of the security study programs. I hope I got everything wrapped up, Andrew. If not, you'll take it on your turn. Of course, we have with us Mrs. Judy-Ann Cilliers. Good evening, Judy. Judy is a political philosopher, researcher, and a communication manager at MathMoms from South Africa. MathMoms is a woman initiative in Cape Town, South Africa, that builds confident communities on maths-empowered child at time. Also, she's an ad hoc lecturer at the Stellenbosch University Philosophy Department and a freelance editor. So we're really happy to have you on board, Judy. Also with us, we have Mrs. Lin van Schalkwyk. I hope I got your surname right, Lin. If not, please correct me.
Van Schalkwyk.
Van Schalkwyk, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Lin is also in South Africa. She's a researcher raised in the town of Stellenbosch. She holds a bachelor's degree arts in BA and law and the honors degree in philosophy from Stellenbosch University. In 2016, she graduated from Tilburg University in the Netherlands with the MA in victimology and criminal justice, and currently is located in Belgium. So it's great to have you aboard also, Lin. Not last but not least, we have Dr. Amir Rostami. I hope you got your surname right, Amir. Thank you for the thumbs up. Amir holds a PhD in sociology from the Stockholm University, and currently he's an associate professor and a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Rostami. I hope I got that right. Dr. Rostami holds a rank of a police superintendent at the Swedish police, and also served as a senior advisor to the Swedish National Coordinator of Safeguarding Democracy Against Violent Extreme. So we have a really, I would say, diverse bunch of experts this evening. And without further ado, I would like to get this panel started. So we'll start with Mr. Andrew Miller. Andrew, the stage is yours.
All right. Well, thank you to the Global Initiative for organizing this incredible event. Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So I'm going to be presenting about police-citizen cooperations in context where there's significant criminal group violence. So many communities experiencing criminal group violence, I would say residents live in what I would term like vacuums of justice, okay? And evidence of this is the fact that roughly 2/3 of homicides go unsolved in many American cities. And this problem's even more acute in other parts of the world. So for instance, in Mexico, the authorities there failed to convict perpetrators in 95% of homicide cases. And authorities fail to provide justice in part because they struggle to promote cooperation with citizens. So we see all that fancy investigative technology in films, on television, that sort of thing, but still critical to identifying perpetrators, locating perpetrators, then eventually convicting them are witnesses themselves and information from citizens themselves. So a Baltimore City police detective put it to me this way: without a witness, most of your violent crime cases aren't going anywhere. So the purpose of my presentation today is just to discuss like how might authorities and community safety advocates encourage witnesses to share information in communities with significant criminal group violence. So I'll go through just the theory, talk a little bit about my method where I try to look at this question, where I focus on Baltimore, Maryland. I'll go over the results, and then I also have an extension of the research in Lagos, Nigeria, and then finally I'll wrap up with policy implications. The core of my theory, which I termed cycles of silence. So the core of this theory is that criminal group violence generates two collective misperceptions that prevent cooperation. So I'd say that violence makes retaliation appear more likely than it is. So even when violence isn't targeting cooperators, just by witnessing, say, violence by one gang towards another gang, that makes retaliation against cooperators appear more likely than it is. And an analogy to this phenomenon is what we see with respect to terrorism, right? Terrorism is shown to be, and a number of surveys show this, that people see terrorism as more likely than it is just because it generates fear. So in the same way that terrorism generates fear, which inflates the perceived likelihood of it, violence by criminal groups inflates the perceived likelihood of retaliation. And in addition to that, this violence, this risk inflation, and both the real and the perceived risk here forces those who might support cooperation with the police to keep that support private, right? So that reduces the perceived cooperation norms in communities, right? And when there's a reduced perceived norm of something in a community, that means less people do it. So that further reduces the likelihood of cooperation with the police. So just to kind of break this down a little bit, this is the theory in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty detail here, but just to show it as simply as possible, I'll say, start with violence, right? So criminal group violence occurs. That is going to inflate retaliation risk. So there is also, of course, real retaliation risk. That real and inflated retaliation risk reduces police citizen cooperation, right? Because people are going to be more hesitant to come forward. And it also has that secondary effect of causing norms in the community to be perceived as less likely than they are. So there's a perception that much fewer people in a given community support cooperation than actually do, right? And that further decreases police citizen cooperation. And ultimately what you get is reduced police citizen cooperation, which reduces the deterrence towards criminals to engage in further violence, and that further violence continues the cycle. So my question is like, how can these cycles of silence be reversed, right? So what I do is I evaluate 3 interventions that could potentially do that. The first intervention is this notion of anonymity, right? So anonymous tip lines are quite common around the world. I wanted to look at the possibility, the viability of these anonymous tip lines for making risk inflation less relevant, right? Because if the police don't have the identity of a cooperator, there's no way that it can get into the hands of a criminal group, right? So potentially that anonymity makes the risk inflation less relevant. I also want to look at norm awareness, right? So there are a number of different organizations around the world that try to promote awareness of cooperation norms. So Audio Pizzo, for instance, in Italy might be one of these organizations that in part does this. A number of neighborhood watch organizations here in the United States, Block Watch, Community Watch organizations do that. So I wanted to look at whether or not such norm awareness actually can help increase police-citizen cooperation. Then I finally also look at whether or not exposing citizens to officers of the same race can boost trust in the police, and that increased trust in the police then in turn could increase cooperation, right? So anonymity, norm awareness, and then exposure to officers of the same race are the 3 primary interventions that I look at in this study. So the method here is a survey in Baltimore, Maryland. And the survey was conducted in about 30 communities in the city. And I'm focusing on the communities with the highest homicide rates, using homicide rates here as a proxy for gang violence. And I surveyed 650 residents. It's primarily internet-based. And I also engaged in a number of interviews, about 60 interviews, and then a number of ride-alongs with police officers to combine the survey results with qualitative data just to validate and contextualize those findings. So what happens in the survey experiment is that respondents are going to watch a fictional news report. So I worked with a local film production company to create fictional news reports. And those reports have a number of experimental variations that are designed to test those various interventions that I talked about, right? And so after the respondents watch these news reports, the news report that's delivered to them, then they indicate, okay, if they were a witness on the scene, how much, if any, information do they think they would provide to the police? So here you can see some of the news reports with the treatment and control groups put side by side, right? So the news reports are basically the same in almost all respects, except for the differences with respect to the intervention, right? So this is just part of the opening scene of the report. You can see this is just a typical news report, tried to make it as realistic as possible. But some respondents received a report where you had officers who were African-American, whereas other respondents had officers who were white, right? And then there's other versions of the report in which the officers were advertising or encouraging residents to call an anonymous tip line, whereas the officers in the control condition were saying, call just their standard tip line that isn't anonymous. And then for this cooperation awareness, the reports also interviewed a community leader where the shooting took place. And in the treatment condition here for cooperation awareness, the community leader emphasizes that a lot of people generally step up, they communicate with the police, they tell the police what they saw, whereas in the control condition, they generally do not do that. So these are the results. When respondents or when the police commander emphasized the anonymity of the tip line, respondents or residents provided 22% more information than they did in the condition compared to the condition where they did not emphasize the anonymity of the tip line. When the community leader emphasized that many others in the community come forward, respondents shared about 23% more information than they did in the condition where the community leader said, very few people come forward. And when the officer was the same race, it didn't seem to make a difference, right? So when residents were exposed to the condition in the report, having the officer as the same race as them, it didn't really change the amount of information that they were willing to share. So as I said, this was done in the context of Baltimore, Maryland, which is a context with high state capacity, right? And a lot of times this research is done in context with very high state capacity, perhaps the United States, perhaps the UK, and then just kind of assume to apply in context where there is less state capacity, right? So what I wanted to do in this to kind of avoid this pitfall is I would just do the experiment in the context of Baltimore, but also do it in a low state capacity context, in Lagos, Nigeria is where it was done. So in Lagos, you have a similar problem in the marketplace. So-called area boy crews engage in violence and extortion of shopkeepers, and the police really struggled to gain cooperation from citizens. This is certainly in part due to corruption, issues with police legitimacy. And in addition to that, you also have, I would say, this cycle of silence dynamics plays out there just as it does in Baltimore and elsewhere.
Andrew, we'll have to start wrapping up. Sorry, 2 minutes.
Am I at time?
Yeah, well, you can take another minute to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thanks. So anyway, so I did a similar experiment in that context of Lagos, and the results were relatively similar, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. I'm happy to talk more in the Q&A, and also please feel free to reach out to me directly if anybody has questions for me. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was really exciting. I mean, showing I would say the ecosystem or the connection of crime, awareness, social behavior, and perception. I think that's a really exciting topic. And please, if anyone has questions, reach out. Please put them in the chat. Andrew will be glad to answer the questions. We'll take a Q&A at the end of the session. And thank you again, Andrew. That was fascinating. Moving on, I'd like to invite Judy-Ann and Lin to the stage, and the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, everybody. I feel really privileged in sharing some of my research that I've done over the last 6 years with you here today. I think it's safe to say that gangsterism is an extremely complex and also contextual phenomenon, and that 5 minutes, in my case, is not nearly enough for any of us to accurately represent the reality of it. But today I hope to share something of what I have learned through my research in specifically narrative criminology. In engaging with so many individuals' stories over the last years, gangsters and ex-gangsters alike, I have continuously been confronted with the way in which, for the individual, his or her lived experience of gangsterism is not one of social disorganization or criminal enterprise, but of the search for belonging, purpose, and identity in a world, as we all know, filled with many types of adversity. If we look at this through the well-known problem tree model, we see that a phenomenon such as gangsterism can have a multitude of root causes. In this example, I have focused on the causes often found in the South African context of gangsterism. Causes such as structural inequality, multidimensional poverty, high exposure to violence, individual and collective trauma, etc. We see here that such root causes or adversities can, amongst other things, give rise to the effect of gangsterism. But more specifically, the move from root causes to gangsterism is found to often happen within the context of a core search for belonging, identity, and purpose. Another way of looking at this is by understanding that adversity can have a completely different effect on the individual, depending on whether or not such adversity was experienced with or without a true sense of belonging, purpose, and identity. In my research, these three things prove to be very essential in respondents' life stories. And I use the term a true sense here because the life stories often revealed a psychological tension during the individual's gang involvement. With this, I mean to say that even though they might have experienced some form of identity, purpose, and belonging in these settings, they often described it as being accompanied by a feeling that they were living a dangerous lie, that they were suppressing their true identity, that their belonging was somehow false or conditional, etc. Because belonging, purpose, and identity are so fundamental to the human experience, a multitude of ways in which each of us will strive to define these aspects for ourselves, including through gangsterism. So this question I want to address today is not, is there belonging, purpose, and identity, but rather, where and how is it being nurtured, cared for, or encouraged? In my research on South African gangsterism, many life stories affirm that in this country, in our country, in my country, with its absolutely debilitating structural inequality and in the grips of very complex intergenerational trauma, both on an individual and a collective level, gangsterism is often the dominant subcultural life choice placed before the individual, by which means they are invited to fight for a sense of self-worth, agency, unity, belonging, to somehow make sense of what else simply remains powerlessness. As one respondent in my study shared, I witnessed a lot of abuse in my household, where my dad would hit my mom for no reason and put his hands on her and take an axe and beat her with the axe, breaking her ribs, times when he would come home from work under the influence of alcohol, still with his safety boots on, and he would just pull her to the ground for no reason and kick her and go crazy. Many times I was watching this happen and I couldn't do anything about it. I am young, I am a child, I can't do anything. I don't understand what is happening. We see so many themes here already, and I wish I had more time. But just to name a few, abuse, exposure to extreme violence as a child, substance abuse, feelings of powerlessness, senselessness. And in this respondent's case, as is the case with so many others, gangsterism, culturally and in many ways strategically and deliberately through recruitment methods, provided him with an out, with an answer, with security, with a way to make his anger and his hurt count for something. Because, as another respondent shared, in these impoverished townships where the social diffusion of violence and violence-related trauma persists alongside all else of life's hardships, they come to believe that this is the place of rejection, the place everybody wants to get out of. Here you learn to be the attacker and not the prey. Now, the big question, sometimes for many, what about law and order in the fight against crime? I would like to share another quote with you from one of my respondents, Mario, who for many years was a notorious gangster with a brutal history of violence and murder. He has since for many years now desisted from all criminal activity and actually plays a key role in supporting others, especially young people, who find themselves in the grips of the same predicaments he did. that in one of his interviews, he said, during his time in gangsterism, I had no respect for society. I had no respect for life. I had no respect for the law or anything, because in gangsterism, I was taught how to break all the rules, and therefore I had no feelings for other people. I was running away from town to town, and I thought the police will never catch me. And in every place I came, my lifestyle of crime and of violence just started to escalate. Now, as a legal scholar myself, I'm the last person to underestimate the power of the law. But I can also tell you, it hasn't ever been, or will it ever be, enough. When we start talking about law and order, we often only see the perpetrator, the criminal other, undeserving of our mercy. But who are they? What are their stories? And how did they get there? This is a photo of Mario as a child, which I share here with his permission. To such a great and underestimated extent, when we speak about gangsterism, and when we think we're speaking about the adult or the teenager with a gun in his hand and murder on his mind, we forget that we're also talking about this boy, the boy who only saw one way out, who believed that his survival and his story could only achieve meaning through what gangsterism offered him at the time. The boy who only had one type of role model for a success story. What if he knew then what he knows today? We must commit ourselves to the creation of alternative, healthy spaces of belonging, identity, and purpose, in which people are allowed to claim agency, to be part of community, and to strive for meaning and purpose in their lives, not only in the context leading up to criminal involvement, but also thereafter when we talk about the need for desistance from crime. Because we cannot expect people to leave their criminal worlds behind if we don't give them a chance to recreate an alternative world for themselves.
Thank you very much, Lin. Well, I think that was a very, very powerful presentation. Gave us a lot of, everyone a lot of time to think, and I think the main message bringing across is always look at the root causes and look at the person behind that picture. I mean, there is a story. We have to find the root causes of the crime, and I'm sure you're doing a great job with the social workers and the people in the correction centers and jails. And I think your message was definitely brought strong and very powerful. And I want to thank you personally for that presentation.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Next up, we have Judy-Ann. The stage is yours, Judy-Ann. Again, great to have you aboard.
Okay, so thank you, Lin, for that. So from what Lin has said, it is clear that the need for alternative structures of belonging exist and that those structures are crucial. And at MathMoms, the organization where I work, our question is whether creating those structures early in a child's life can catch them before they become involved in gangsterism or in criminal activities. So a couple of years ago in our program, one of the boys said the following. He said, "When I hold a gun, I don't feel so powerless. I feel like I am somebody." He was 12 years old. And we know that children, especially boys, are groomed from a very young age, from the research shows 7, 8, 9 years old, to join the gangs in their communities. And many children, like this boy, feel like nobodies for whom the gangs provide the only gateway to become somebodies. What MathMoms does is to show a different way for every child to discover that they are indeed a somebody. We address many of the root causes of crime and violence in our communities, multidimensional poverty, the crises in our education systems, a culture of violence, and unaddressed individual, communal, and historical trauma. MathMoms employs and trains previously unemployed women and youth to become mathematics tutors to foundation phase learners in their communities. We have 3 overarching aims: improving academic results, creating economic opportunities for unemployed adults, and creating safe spaces with healthy, continuous intergenerational relationships in the hopes of building resilient communities. We achieve these aims by training and upskilling adults, and mostly women, by equipping them as broadly as possible so that they can transmit academic and life skills to learners in their communities, by giving the average foundation phase learner a solid basis in mathematics, literacy, and study techniques, where the school system often fails them, by improving the self-esteem of participants, by improving parental involvement in schools, by nurturing intergenerational relationships, by creating safe spaces through a trauma-informed approach in which adults and learners can find healing, learning, and connection. At the heart of our program lies the knowledge that if we do not break through the trauma in people's lives and in our communities, learning and growth cannot effectively take place, and vulnerability to organized crime, to gangsterism, to extortion will remain. We therefore aim to nurture resilience in individuals and communities by establishing what we call our triangles of trust. Our understanding of the impact of trauma and the importance of relationships is informed by attachment theory. Attachment is one of our first lessons in the home. A caregiver's attachment with a child in their early years can profoundly shape the child's future relationships and also the child's ability to deal with uncertainties, to face challenges, and to recognize opportunities. Trauma in caregivers can block attachment and lead to trauma in children, a cycle that is hard but not impossible to break out of. Through our program, we want to ensure that children are able to form positive attachments with caring adults in their communities, as a stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult is crucial for developing resilience as a child. To do that, we provide adult participants with tools, knowledge, and support to start them on the path to healing, to ensure that they are emotionally grounded before they engage with learners. We also incorporate mindfulness exercises in our academic interventions to ensure that learners feel secure in our classrooms. Our teaching approach is playful, and paired with the individual attention that learners receive, this helps them to form relationship with the MathMoms. The three sides of our triangle, which you can see on the slide, correspond to the three factors Lin and I suggest can contribute to resilience against organized crime. Through relationship building, we nurture a sense of belonging and community. Through nurturing love or mothering love, attachments are formed and trauma is addressed, enabling the discovery of individual agency and identity. Through skills transfer in our training with the women and in our classes with the learners, we lead them on the road to discovering their purpose and provide the tools and experience to realize that purpose. Many participants in our program, and you can see the size of our operations there, have gone on to find permanent employment or enrolled in tertiary studies, mostly to become social workers or teachers. One young intern recently said to me that she never knew that she was good with children before joining MathMoms, and now she's preparing to qualify as a teacher. One of our MathMoms, who I think is in the audience, self-identified at the start of her journey as a couch potato, and now she's a mentor in our program. She's active in her community and at her local school. Our program is too young to say whether it has definitively prevented anyone from joining gangs, and determining that is not really part of our purpose. Our purpose is to create structures of belonging in communities, and especially around vulnerable children. We speak of placing learners in ICU or in intensive care, ICU. They not only receive an education, but also recognition, a sense of agency and confidence in their own abilities. Their chances of staying in school or finding employment or furthering their studies or their education is improved, and they are recognized as somebodies who can positively contribute to their community and their country. And they leave their program, perhaps most importantly, with the knowledge that there is someone, in fact, a whole network of adults in their community who cares for them, to whom they can always turn in need, and who will act as a safety net should they fall. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Judy. That was a really great presentation, carrying on the former presentation about the causes. I mean, you really emphasized, I would say, the practical tools that you're providing, that society can provide. And I think the message that you really brought along was that the youngsters, they're not transparent. We have to show them that they're not transparent, that they really belong to someone, some society, that they have a purpose in life and they have identity. And by the way, those three creators that you underlined, or I would say, or you can take them through to life, to any place of work or any organization. And I want to thank you for that. It was a fascinating presentation.
Thank you, Paul.
So we're going to move on. Last but not least on the presentation side, we have Dr. Amir Rostami. And Amir, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists. It was great presentations. And thank you, Paul, for moderating the session. It's evening here in Sweden. It's cold and it's dark. So I'm a little bit jealous for those that are in other warmer places like South Africa. So I'm going to present a paper that we have submitted with my dear colleague, Hernan Mondani, with the title of Criminal Nomads, the Role of Multiple Affiliations in the Network of Criminal Collaboration between Hells Angels, EMS, and Bandidos. And giving you a background of this paper is that it started with our interest of studying the nexus, the crime-terror nexus. As you may know, there are a long debate, both academic debate, but also in the policy field, that is there a nexus between terrorism and crime? Is there a nexus between violent extremism and organized crime? And you could say that there are two sides. One side that I'm quoting here, Bruce Hoffman, saying that you should distinguish between terrorists and ordinary criminals because they are driven by different motives. Terrorists are driven by political motives, and organized crime, ordinary criminals are driven by material gain. And then you have the other side of the dimensional spectra. Let's see, for example, here illustrated by a quote from Lezio Paoli, which she argues that there are structural and organizational similarities between organized crime, youth gangs, and terrorist groups. So she's saying that the thirst for power, especially local power, is probably always a more important driving force than the mere desire for wealth. So this has been ongoing debate for at least, I would say, 25 years. And we decided maybe we have done studies on this in a Swedish context. We find, I would say, a quite clear nexus between violent extremism and organized crime in Sweden. But we were interested to test this in a new setting. So we try to, in this study, testing or investigating the nexus within organized crime. We somehow believe that by dissecting the nexus in a criminal antagonistic setting, we can contribute to the field of crime-terror nexus. So we decide to investigate, is there a nexus between two old folks, Bandidos and Hells Angels, that for decades have been in conflict, both internationally, but especially in the Nordic context. We had between 1994 and 1997, the Great Nordic Biker War, with a lot of casualties and deadly casualties between the Hells Angels and Bandidos. So we try to say, okay, can we find a nexus in between this group, and what can the results show us or give us more knowledge about nexus in general? So the aim of this study is to explore if and how criminal collaboration exists between two biker clubs or outlaw motorcycle gangs, that we can assume they lack interest in collaborating with each other because they are rivals. We seek to answer the following research question. Is there a direct collaboration in crime between members of two historical foes, Hells Angels and Bandidos? If yes, is there a specific group of individuals who act as facilitators in connecting different facets of Hells Angels and Bandidos? And what are the profiles of these individuals? In this study, we use a compilation of governmental registry. Basically, we have gained a register from the Swedish Law Enforcement Agency, the Swedish police, where they have identified members in different organized crime groups, such as OMCGs. And we use crime data from the Swedish Agency for Crime Prevention, BRÅ, which is the agency in Sweden responsible for gathering data on crime. So, and as a method, we are using social network analysis. So basically here, collaboration in crime, let me explain like this. If we have one case where we can find two individuals that have been suspected for the same crime in the same case, we are using that as a proxy as collaboration. So if, for example, me and Paul, we are suspected of doing a robbery together, we have a link between us, and that becomes a collaboration between me and Paul. So, and if Paul belongs to Hells Angels and I belong to Bandidos, then we have a collaboration between two individuals with different organizational backgrounds or entities. So this is how we try to measure collaboration between members of Hells Angels and Bandidos. But within the data, we have also individuals that the police have labeled as with multiple affiliation. So they are both members of Hells Angels and Bandidos. And the question is how? And the simple answer to that is we at the moment don't know. It could be that there are individuals that have changed affiliation, but it can also be that there are people who are moving between the two organizations, and that because of that, it has been difficult to categorize them as only with one membership. So we have three categories in this study: full members of Hells Angels, full member of Bandidos, and individuals that have multiple affiliation. What we find in this analysis, which is that when we look at full members of the two organizations, the blue one is, if I remember, Bandidos, and the red one is, to be honest, I don't remember the color here. But this is only, every dot is full member, and you see the link is collaboration in crime. When we are looking at full members, we don't see a collaboration, at least not collaboration in more in extensive collaboration. In few cases we find here, for example, here we can find a little bit of collaboration between very few individuals, but we don't find a structural collaboration between full members of Hells Angels and Bandidos. When we go further and add the nodes with multiple affiliation, suddenly an interesting pattern is merged. We see a huge collaboration between these two organizations, with the multiple affiliators as brokers. For example, if we color the one that are linked, we will gain this picture. So adding individuals with more than one affiliation with Hells Angels and Bandidos creates a giant component. So this gives us one clue that maybe we don't find, if we, going back to the crime terror nexus question, maybe you don't find a clear collaboration between terror organization and organized crime. However, we find people who are moving between different settings. It could be within organized crime. They are moving between, collaborating between, in this case, two organizations that have a historical, hostilities between them. But still, with the multiple affiliated, they are having a very small step in between them, so they say. So basically, very short about the conclusion. So in this study, we investigated the criminal collaboration between the two OMCGs in Sweden, the role of the members of Hells Angels and Bandidos regarding internal and external collaboration. I have only shown you the external collaboration in crime. Our results show that these two antagonistic OMCGs, they have more criminal collaboration that would be expected considering their history of rivalry. We also observe significant differences between members with only one gang membership and those with multiple gang membership. As an example, the individuals with multiple membership, so-called criminal nomads, because they are like nomads, they are moving around between different gangs, have distinctive network brokerage role, facilitating collaboration between the two rivals. So we hope this gives us another clue, another dimension in the debate on crime terror nexus, saying that, okay, when we are investigating the nexus between organized crime and terrorism, maybe we need to look closer to which individuals who are creating the nexus between the two organizations or two milieus. I think I am done, Paul. I don't think yeah.
Yeah, well, that brings us down to the time. Yeah, well,
great.
First of all, thank you, Amir. I mean, that was a great, I think, a wrap-up session. First of all, for giving the term nexus that we haven't heard about in a while. And what's interesting, I think, is the perception of most of us that gangs are working separately. There's no connection between the gangs, and the collaboration between them. Is it a common enemy, common goals? Is it power conflicts? And I think, those are questions that interest me, and I would also be interested if it's the same pattern in terror groups, or terror groups also, working between ourselves on the same model that you showed us. So it definitely opens very wide horizons for different vectors. So I'm sure there'll be questions about that in the Q&A session. Ladies and gentlemen, we have time, and we're coming to the Q&A session, and the questions are starting to come in. And there are questions coming in, and I would like to address the first question to Judy-Ann. So Judy-Ann, if you can open your camera. The question that came in is, why did your program choose to focus on mathematics, education, and on mothers, and not fathers, or only mothers? And how do you see this contributing to resilience against the gangsterism?
So I'll start with the last bit. So like I said in my presentation, there's this almost crisis of belonging and of knowing for children what to do with their future. As Lin said, for many, it feels as if the gangs, especially I think for young boys, as if the gangs are the only options. We decided to focus on mathematics because maths is seen as a difficult subject. So if you can master mathematics, you're clever and you are capable. So to foster, on the one hand, a sense of agency and trust in their thinking and their problem-solving abilities in the children, but also because mathematics opens doors to so many career paths that remain closed to many children in South Africa, because the state of mathematics education in South Africa is really frightening. So that's why we chose mathematics. But maths for us really, or our academic program really, is a vehicle to to arrive at belonging and nurturing. We chose mothers because we want to empower women. Many women in South Africa, if you only do a quick Google of gender-based violence statistics, we just had a 16-day campaign nationally against that. Women need empowerment, and we know if you invest in women, they reinvest in their communities. If you invest in women, they are more resilient against domestic violence. And many of the homes in our communities, the fathers are absent for a variety of reasons. So the mothers are there, the women are there, but we don't only have mothers or women. So we see this nurturing love obviously as something that anyone can have. And we have men in our program. We have young men who serve as role models through our internship program. So it's really this idea of nurturing love and building confidence in children so that they are more resilient in themselves and so that they see a different future.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer, Judy-Ann. Thank you. The next question is for you, Andrew, Dr. Miller. I don't know if you could see the question in the chat. If not, I will read it out. The question is by Martin Delia. Dr. Miller addresses trust in police only with regards to the same race police officers, which doesn't seem to have an impact. How does this trust in police relate to wider trust in society and social structures, or relating to Lin's presentation, could gang membership and refusal to be a witness to the police share some root causes? So, Andrew, I think you should take the first part of the question, and Lin, if you have anything to add at the end, we'll be glad.
Yeah, great. I think it's a really, really good question. So if I'm interpreting it correctly, it's kind of getting at this issue of like, all right, if you have a community with high levels of interpersonal trust among those in the community, does that mean that individuals in that community are more inclined to trust the police, right? And the frank answer is, I don't know. I'm not sure if there's been work on that. If there hasn't been, I think it would definitely be valuable to do. What I would say is that it probably depends on a number of factors. And one of those factors is how embedded the police are within the community that they're operating in. So in a place like Baltimore, where I conducted much of this research, same with Lagos, the police are not particularly well embedded into the community. So in Baltimore, they don't live in the city for the most part. They come from different states in some contexts. So if individuals in that community have higher levels of interpersonal trust among others, it probably wouldn't necessarily translate into higher trust of the police because the police aren't seen as being part of the community itself. So that interpersonal trust would not necessarily translate. But if you do have a context where you have police officers who are very much embedded in the community and there is higher interpersonal trust in that community, then I could see it having an effect and boosting trust in some way. But short answer is, I don't think we know, but it would certainly be worth finding out.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. Lin, do you have anything to add on this topic of the question? You're on mute, Lin. This is a word that, COVID has brought us. You're on mute. Go ahead.
I think, as Andrew had said, it's a very good question and a very beautiful, complicated question, because there's often, if I speak now specifically for the case in South Africa, we see these opposing forces between community and the state. They are enemies of each other. There are these power dynamics continuously at play. And these power dynamics also become politicized in, like, before voting starts, the political parties will talk a lot about extreme gangsterism and call up the community to speak out against crime. But there's no foundation for calling the community up because there's no trust between the state and its people. So that's a massive problem. Certainly a distrust. in these structures, but also it is not so easy to speak up on crime. We heard about these cycles of silence, and I think politically you can often see people say, well, somebody must know who these people are. It's someone's brother, it's someone's father, it's someone's mother doing these things. But they don't realize the other side of that. It is exactly that. It's someone's brother, it's someone's mother, it's someone's father. And to speak up against your family, to speak up about things so complex where your own well-being, your own home is involved, that's not an easy thing to ask. And I think we can put ourselves in that position as well. I mean, standing up in the name of secrecy sometimes to protect our loved ones, even from the most small sin. It's not an easy thing to ask. So I think those are some of my insights to the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lin. Thank you. Amir, there's a question coming to your end in Sweden. So if you could, the question is, when you conducted your research, were you looking at the field of cooperation, the cause of cooperation, or just the link analysis between the gangs?
This study is a part of a larger project that we look and try to map out the basic dimension of organized crime in Sweden and also violent extremism. But I will say our interest from the beginning was the organizational dimension, but in this case is more about collaboration between different groups and between different individuals. We use social network analysis as a tool. So, and we do other stuff like qualitative part to map out the collaboration. But I would say collaboration is the main purpose.
I see. Carrying on that line that you emphasized, another question, I'm just going to take it with you and carry it on. Were there any cases that a new gang was formed because of the linkage or the collaboration between two gangs, or did each of them keep their organic identity?
We have, in this case, only investigated or studied the collaboration between these two distinct gangs. But I forget to mention during my presentation, because when we looked at the nexus between violent Islamic extremism and organized crime, we find different clusters of nexus. And when we look closer to that, we suddenly find there are members of bikers, members of street gangs, members of a different kind of crime groups. So that was, I think, where we started to ask ourselves, is this something about nexus or nomads? Because suddenly you find clusters of individuals with different affiliation to different types of groups. But we haven't done more, we're still, in this case, only studying on the milieu level between violent Islamic extremism and organized crime, and in this case, between Hells Angels and Bandidos.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question that's come in, it's for you, Judy-Ann. The question is, what breakthroughs have you seen in people's lives in the communities following your interventions?
So, like I said, we don't measure for, we don't follow the children to see whether they have gangs, but we have, based on feedback and based on testing that we've done, seen significant academic improvements at the schools where we have our interventions, not only with the children in our program, but broader in their whole classes. We only take a couple of children from each class. But I think our biggest breakthrough is in the lives of the women and the interns in our program. So we see the program as a stepping stone, not as a permanent place of employment. And so many of them have found employment and permanent employment and are now breadwinners in their homes. Almost 20 of them this year from a relatively small group. Almost 20 of them enrolled for tertiary studies, which given their economic position, it's not that easy to do. So these we really see as breakthroughs of people getting opportunities, being able to care for their families. And throughout COVID, and the effects of the lockdown, we've really seen a difference in the children who are in our program, both emotionally and academically, and the children who are not.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Judy. Another question is coming your way, Andrew. The question is, you were speaking about the perception of the public, if it's the race of the officer and so on. Was there any relation to the type of crime? Did this affect the perception of the social behavior of the public? If it was a very violent crime, or it was just car accident, or, I mean, did you focus on the type of crime in your studies?
So I didn't do any variation on type of crime, say from low-level crime versus like, let's say, violent crime, something like that. I focused just primarily on violent crime because I think, normatively, from a normative perspective, I think that's particularly problematic issue with criminal group presence in communities. So I didn't capture anything empirically, any sort of variation on how that changes when it comes to the level of crime.
I see. Thank you for that. Maybe it's something to think about in the next researchers in your cases. We have a question for coming your way, Lin. You spoke a lot about, I would say, the social causes, the root causes, the adversity. What were in the root causes? Were there any root causes that really stood out, that you could say that brought people to violence, to gangs, to crime more than others? I mean, on all the ones that you put out in your presentation. Lin, you're on mute again. Sorry.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes, there was. I didn't have time to go into this distinction, but I think it's important for people to understand that all of us experience adversity, and I mean, some obviously a lot more than others. But adversity does not have to lead to trauma. Often adversity without those three things I spoke about, without some way of meaning making, leads to trauma. And it is often this thick layer of trauma that becomes the main cause for where the individual ends up with in this state of almost social and private decay. And in a country like South Africa, the trauma, like Judy has also mentioned, is a multi-level trauma. It is not only an historical political trauma that collective groups have experienced through years of oppression, neglect, inequality, but also intergenerational trauma, trauma from grandparents to kids to their grandchildren. Not only relating to, for example, something genetic like alcohol abuse, but also the way in which a parent who is traumatized and has not had the ability to deal with that trauma, the way in which such a parent parents a child is often traumatizing for that child, the way in which the adult projects pain and suffering and oppression onto that child because of their own denial. So that in itself becomes this hard shell that leads to, often we see this trauma leading to circumstances that are just fit for the social diffusion of violence. Because the bigger the trauma, the more hardened the individual becomes, the less opportunity they have to engage with their own trauma, often we see the more violent even their crimes become. because they don't have the ability to access their own vulnerability. In a sense, they become, like many of my respondents also said, like having no respect for life, having no respect for people, and in that case, that moral consciousness is non-existent, and their crimes can just escalate to sometimes an inhuman extent that as a healthy human being you would have a hard time sleeping at night knowing what happens behind closed doors.
Thank you for that, Lin. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have 10 minutes left, so I'd like to give the panelists the opportunity to for closing remarks or closing statements or words, and even give us a vision for next year on what they're going to focus on and what they're going to speak about in the next conference where we're going to meet together. So Amir, if you'd like to start, you were last for the presentation, so I'll give you the honor of speaking first. Stage is yours. Each one just a minute each, so we can give each other time.
You give me all the difficult tasks. Being first out with this question is difficult. I'm just happy to be here, and thank you for great presentations. That and next year, who knows?
Well, Amir, there is a question. Sorry, it came in very fast for you, so I can't get away. I actually brought this topic up also. Do you see similarities between organized crime, terrorism, in reasons why people join in their personal life stories and so on?
Especially in Swedish context, yes, we see similarities. And I will say also the latest research on when it comes to violent extremists, they see that they see also some similarities because they are coming from the same pools. They are coming from vulnerable areas. They are coming from same backgrounds. And we have done a couple of interviews with both extremists and gang members, but in one study that was published I think last year, we saw similarities. We did interview between people who joined both far right and left and violent Islamic extremists. We saw a lot of similarities regarding about network links, the social bonds, who they were friends with, who invited them into the milieu. That was one of the key causes. So yes, we see similarities, but I'm also aware that there are a lot of differences between the different milieus that we need to take into consideration too. So thank you.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you for that. Andrew, closing remarks, any visionary aspects?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you everybody for the incredible presentations. I learned a lot. What I'm hoping to do, or what I'm increasingly interested in, it somewhat relates to Amir's work, and he's looking at the crime terror nexus. I kind of want to look at the crime state nexus. So how do state entities use criminal organizations for their own means? So for instance, we see this when states are sanctioned by Western powers generally. They sometimes tap into illicit networks to rat around those sanctions. Sometimes political parties will use gangs to advance their electoral chances, that sort of thing. So I kind of want to explore that relationship as much as possible. If I can, I'm just going to sneak in a question for Lin. She doesn't have to answer it, but I'd just be curious. Maybe we can talk about it offline. I think the research is fascinating, and I'd be curious to hear her thoughts on what it implies for how kind of justice should be delivered in such context. So you have this recognition of there are structural conditions that lead individuals to engage in criminal activity. So what does that mean kind of from a policy perspective? It really just came to mind when during a presentation, which I thought was excellent. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Judy-Ann, remarks, closing words.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think Andrew and Amir, a lot of the things you said also echoed the realities in South Africa, and it's really increases my confidence in humanity to know that across the globe there are opportunities for people to learn from each other about these things. Our focus in our program has always first and foremost been creating safe spaces and healing trauma, and we are really going to invest in that next year. Going forward with the economic difficulties of the fallout from lockdowns and the continuing pandemic, the children are really suffering in our schools, and they are falling more and more behind. We have 10-year-olds who can't write their names, who now have to go and continue their education. So our focus will be on continuing to create structures of belonging and support for those children where they can really flourish. And tomorrow morning, I think Lin can invite all of you. Lin and I and some others are going to have another interesting conversation. Lin, I don't know if you want to tell them about that.
Lin, this is your stage for the closing words, because we do have 4 minutes left. So you have
Okay.
2 minutes to answer.
Okay, so anybody who wants to join, just the ad for tomorrow, session 12E, I'll be discussing some more about my research and a book I wrote. But Andrew, I just wanted to tell you as well, it's a fascinating question, and it gets me so excited that you ask it, because I am very hopeful for what is possible within those contexts. I mean, when we talk about, for example, prisons in South Africa being correctional centers, it becomes sort of, it takes us to that point where what do we mean by correcting that behavior and correcting those patterns? Even when we talk about things like victim-offender dialogue, that's very, what does it look like in these cases? Who is the victim? Who is the offender? We often see that dangerous identity switch between victim to offender. So these gray areas are very complex, but they also create a lot of room for, I think, really in-depth dealing with these issues. And I'd love to talk to you more about that. I'd just like to say thank you for everyone and your amazing presentations. My only hope for maybe next year is having some target group inclusion. I'd love to speak to more, gangsters, have them part of the panel. That's my dream. Like, I think we often look at these things from outside perspective, trying to go in. But sometimes why many of our goals fail or aren't really that efficient is because we don't often include those who know that world and who could work together with us. Maybe those collaborations, Amir, could go from them to us as well, in a good sense, not to make money. But yeah, so that would be my dream. That's all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that, Lin. First, I want to thank the organizers for inviting us all. It was a fascinating panel. I really enjoyed getting to know you all, and of course, seeing the great presentations. I want to thank you personally, Andrew, Judy-Ann, Amir, Lin, and Andrea behind the scenes for pushing this and generating this panel. So once again, I want to hopefully we can all meet face to face in the next conference. The variants will be over. We'll be back to normal, and let's all remember: there's no one transparent. Look for the root causes and keep crime off the streets. So keep safe, everyone, and hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the OC24 podcast. For more talks, have a look at the podcast feed on whichever platform you use. There are loads more to listen to. Video versions of these talks are also available on the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime YouTube channel. If you would like to share these talks around, we ask that you use the hashtag OC24 and let us know what you think. The 24-hour conference on global organised crime is brought to you by the European Consortium of Political Research Standing Group on Organised Crime, the Centre for Information and Research on Organised Crime, the International Association for the Study of Organised Crime, and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. For more information, head over to oc24.globalinitiative.net. This has been the OC24 podcast from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Thanks for listening.